Hey, good morning to those of you out there on the West Coast. Good afternoon to those of you here on the East Coast with me. It's a great day outside, so I'm excited about that. We're going into day two of a week-long focus on end-of-year spending, especially on 8As. But we've got a lot of training coming in here, and so I'm going to dive straight in. I'm going to skip my normal tip, and I just want to get in and dive into the training. So let me turn this caption off, and we'll do that. And good morning to those of you in chat, saying hello in chat. I'm looking at you for a second, then I'm going to turn away and focus on my slides, but we'll definitely come back. Actually, I'll give you a quick tip before we start. Just letting everybody know, if you're not following me on LinkedIn, on my profile, I drop posts. And this morning, I dropped a post, how to do business with Department of Homeland Security. Yesterday was how to do business with the Department of Health and Human Services. And so we're trying to drop these kind of posts this week. Go ahead and take a look at them because they have points of contact in there. They have information about forecast, the org chart, et cetera. And it's a great stepping off point if you're trying to refresh your memory or even a brand new start into a particular agency. So that's on my activity in my posts for today. All right, let me share my screen and we're going to get rocking and rolling. Okay, today we're going to be talking about where buyers find 8A firms for end of year spending. And even though I'm saying 8As, keep in mind that this is also, everything I say today is also where they find veteran-owned or woman-owned or hub-zone firms, small business firms. Everything that I'm talking about applies to all small businesses. I'm just focusing the energy on 8A firms because there's a lot of activity that happens at the end of the year. And so as we get started, I want you to just think to yourself, really hold yourself accountable for 1 second, that if you're not where buyers are looking, then how on earth can they find you, right? How can we blame the buyers for not finding us or doing set-asides, et cetera, if we're not where they're at, if we're not where they're looking? And I really want you to pay attention to that. And we're going to go into the training today. I'm going to tell you exactly where they're looking and what you can do to make yourself more visible. So the first thing I want to just talk about as we get started is just from an 8A sole source perspective, to understand that end of the year spending is a reality, right? This is different. For me, I'm a small business. I'm not actually selling to the government. I'm teaching you at the moment, but I spent 20 years doing it, right? But I'm just a small business. That's it. Well, there's not a lot of that end of the year activity for me that's going to happen in the fourth quarter. For me, it's more all 12 months, right? But there is a reality at the end of the fiscal year. In the last quarter, 50% of the 8A sole source dollars, and that's $8 billion, right? 50% of the $8 billion that is direct awarded to 8A firms is done in the fourth quarter. 67% of the task orders or contracts, right? If you go to USA Spending and you look at the activities, there's like 16,000 activities through the year, 10,000 of them are in the fourth quarter. And when you see that, it's a reality for 8A small businesses that direct awards are happening then. And so understanding how can you be part of that activity. I describe it kind of end of year spending as like a pond, especially for 8A firms, right? It's like a pond. I don't know if you fish, right? But I grew up in San Francisco, and in San Francisco, we had an ocean, which was awesome. But we also had something called Lake Merced. It was this huge lake. And it was a pond where we'd go fishing. My twin brother and I would go out there, and sometimes we'd get lucky that we'd watch these trucks back up to the pond. So here's the lake and the pond. We'd have this huge lake, and there's a pier where we'd fish off of. And right here was a ramp where usually boats would go in, but instead they'd back up these huge dump trucks of fish because they had to stock the pond. And so they'd back them up, dump them in, and you could just cast your line in there with no bait, and you would be able to catch fish. You'd reach your 2 fish limit pretty fast. But the reality is, you can't have any success when they're backing that truck up and dumping the fish into the lake or into the pond if you don't have a pole. And government contracting is the same thing for end of the year spending. There can't be all this end of the year spending happening, but you don't show up with a pole. You're not showing up where the buyers are looking. You're not making sure you're visible, you're competent, you're procurement ready, all the elements that go into it. And I'll talk a little bit about it now, but let's remember, don't put the responsibility on the government to make sure you're prepared. Be prepared yourself and show up to that pond of end of the year spending with a solid core competency, right? Really understanding what you sell and communicating it to the buyer. If you say you sell too many things, they're just going to get confused and move on. the end of the year, they need clarity and they need speed. And so you need to be able to say, hey, this is what we sell. For example, SharePoint services or acquisition support services or elevator support. When you have that clarity around your core competency, they're going to be able to see it quickly. And then you also need to bring past performance. I don't want to sit there and pretend that if you don't have past performance, you can go in and get end of the year spending. Yes, there are stories where that happens, but that's not the norm. Even though the government is spending fast at the end of the year, they still need to minimize the risk by making sure they're going with companies who have been paid for the work that they're trying to find. So elevator service, for example, they need you to have done elevator service. All right, so in today's training, I'm going to cover down on 3 main points that I want you to pay attention to, and you'll have action items coming directly out of today's training. The first thing is I want you to understand how federal buyers do their research at the end of the year. It's different than how they do it throughout the year. There's commonalities for sure, but there's a lot more fever happening in the end of the year. And then the second thing is which supplier portals, which portals you must be registered in order to get found, right? I said, if you're not where buyers are looking, then how can they find you? Well, I'm going to tell you where they're looking, and then it's up to you to make sure you're in there. And then the last one that we're going to cover down is this whole idea of why you must have an RFI response machine or system in place. And so I want to talk to you about that because that is another great way to participate in the end of the year spending. If you don't know who I am, my name is Neil McDonnell. I'm the president of the GovCon Chamber of Commerce. I want to welcome you to my federal sales training where I provide tips for success in the federal market. I spent 20 years as a small business in the federal market. And since 2018, I've been teaching people like you that government contracting is not a secret. It's just a process. When you follow a process A to Z, you're going to have repeatable, predictable results. And that's what I want for you. Before we get started, again, put your company name into the chat, your core competencies. Keep in mind, we just had like 150 people live yesterday with a 24-hour notice, 150 people live, and many of them were federal buyers or buyer representatives. They weren't industry, right? And today it might be the same thing. I see we're already over 60 people just on LinkedIn, and then we're on different platforms. So put your company name in. Make it easy, not just for the buyers and me to remember you and know you, but also your teaming partners. You know, if you're not an 8A, maybe you can team up with an 8A. Or if you're an 8A who's got a vehicle, et cetera, maybe you'd want to team up with somebody who has a competency that you don't have so you can go after a broader set of work. And then finally, if you're open to connecting on LinkedIn, I certainly am going to connect with you if I see you and you're in here. There's a commonality, right? But if you're open to a broader set of connections to the community that we're building of GovCon folks, people on the government side and on industry and those who support, if you're open to connections, just let us know. Say I'm open to connections in the chat. Okay, so let's talk about how agencies do market research at the end of the year. The end of the year is more like going on vacation. This is the analogy I want to give you, right? If you could think about the last time you took a 2-week vacation, and I know we got a lot of small business owners, so maybe you've never taken a vacation, but whenever we take a vacation, right, we're going away for 2 weeks, a 2-week vacation, somehow you start rushing around, right? All year long, you've just been doing your kind of 9 to 5, or for, you know, entrepreneurs, 12 to 12. But for all year long, you've been doing this normal way of going to work and you're doing the activity at work. You're doing a good job, but you're also hanging out at the water cooler, talking about the TV show yesterday, the sports game. You know, you're taking a little longer lunches. You're doing your job, but it's a little mellower pace, right? But right before you go on vacation, you start speeding up the activity. You start becoming more effective and efficient at your job and whatever you're doing because you're worried about things falling down when you're gone. You don't want this thing to fall to not get done. You've got a project that is due, but you're not going to be here for 2 weeks. You need your team to keep moving it forward. Whatever it is, you're doing all these things, either trying to get them all done before vacation or prepare them so they go away. So you're doing a lot of activity. Well, government contracting is kind of that same thing, right? They kind of do normal acquisition life cycle all throughout the year. But when it gets to July, right? July and August, they're really picking up speed. And by the time they get to September, it's like a basketball playoff, right? We did the playoffs in July and August, and September is like the championship game. It's really weird how a lot of people will watch playoffs in basketball or other sports, and then they watch championship game because the play is just so amazing, which I always find ironic. It's like, well, why didn't you just play that hard all through the year and then you would have won the championship? But that's a different story, right? But it's that same thing. You can understand it. Well, the government at the end of the year is the same thing. The contracting officer, they've been playing basketball all year long, having fun, doing a good job, you know, partying. But when it comes to playoffs, no partying, no fun. We're just heads down. We're going to get into the championship and then win win it all, right? And that's what government contractors are like. They're just kind of rushing at the end. You need to appreciate that that's what they're doing, because it makes how they do market research at the end of the year differently. Contracting officers, they have no time. They're moving. And it really gets down to a short listing activity. In the last quarter, in June or July and August, they're doing some of the, and I don't want to suggest that they're doing anything wrong or they're doing it fast, so they're shortcutting, but they are just moving faster at what they're doing. And so they're trying to shortlist fast. And that really is the activity of market research. I'm just trying to find vendors that could fill the requirement and help us with our mission. I always say that the government does not buy from the best. If you are the very best at what you do, it doesn't matter. The government doesn't buy from the best. They buy from the best of who shows up, right? So if you show up at RFI, if you show up at RFP, then you have a shot at being considered. But if you're not showing up at all, then you're not going to be considered, right? And so when you show up, or when they do market research, they're shortlisting. And I just want to give you a couple of examples here, 6 examples of how they go through shortlisting. And this is based on my experience across almost all agencies, right? Some contracting officers have their own individual way, but when you sit there and figure out how they're all doing it on average, this is it. The first thing they're doing when they're trying to figure out, hey, who can I look at for market research on a requirement? They look at existing vendors. If we already got people we're paying and we like them, is there anybody here who might be the right fit for us? If that option's a no-go for them, they move on. They look at people who have recently responded to RFIs and RFPs, and I'm going to talk to you about that in a minute. But if you have recently responded to RFIs and RFPs, then you're letting the government know, that contracting officer know, well, they're interested in working with us. We didn't choose them on the last one, but maybe we invite them back because at least they responded. And for a contracting officer, that's the number one thing they need in order to make an award decision, is they need some vendor saying, hey, we want to work with you. If no vendors respond, they can't determine an award. That's why if you go into FPDS, you'll see tons of opportunities that only one person responded to. Right? It's not hard for them to sole source it or direct award it when only one vendor is responding. The third thing, so they're looking at the existing vendors, then they're looking at the recent RFI responders. And number 3, they look at their own hard drive. If they've had you reach out to them and give them a capability statement, if they happen to be in an event and they got a bunch of capability statements, they keep them in their own hard drive, right? Just on their in their own folder. And so they might do a quick search in there. Hey, do I have any vendors? This is when they might pull in the small business specialists as well. Of course, every agency does it a little differently, but they might look over and say, hey, Jane, do you know any small businesses that can help me with this requirement? I have sat in small business professionals' offices when a KO will interrupt our meeting and they'll say exactly that. And I'll watch the small business specialists go, well, I know Janie, Tommy, and Bobby, they've been recently reaching out. They're all qualified. Let me call them. And in the meeting, I'll watch them pick up the phone and call Janie, Tommy, and Bobby. And so you want to be expressing interest to the contracting officer, small business specialist. Let them know, because they've got personal folders of vendors like you who are expressing interest. The fourth way is agency supplier portals. I've done a whole training on this before, but agencies like HHS, they have a supplier portal. You want to make sure you're in there because they're going to look there first. If an HHS buyer, contracting officer, looks in their folder and they don't see anybody, then they look at the small business directory that HHS runs. And many agencies have this. You can download our directory of all, I think it's like 100 supplier portals. But they'll look at the HHS small business directory and decide, hey, are any of these people, could they fit it? So if you're looking for an 8A firm, that's where they'll look first. And then after that, if they can't find anybody, they move into the dynamic small business search tool. So dynamic small business search is one of 2 parts of your small business profile. Small business profile is made up of sam.gov when you register getting in. And by the way, never, ever forget it. I just talked to a company that's got like $20 million, but their profile is expired, which puts them at risk for not being able to get selected on a proposal, because how can the government award it to them? They're not technically registered in SAM. Go look at it, right? Go look at your profile on a regular basis every 6 months. Anyways, dynamic small business search is the part that tells the story about what do you sell behind your SAM registration. So in there is where the buyers go. I describe it as the #1 market research tool for federal buyers across the board. It's the only tool that's referenced in the FAR where it says, hey, do your market research. For example, go look at the DSBS. So they teach contracting officers and market researchers how to do market research. And the one tool that they mention is coming in here, DSBS. And the last place is new sources sought. I'll talk about that at the end of this training here about responding to RFIs, but you want to respond to RFIs as sources sought because when you're responding, it gives them a chance to choose you. And so that last place they'll do market research is, well, if I have to send it out, I will. Sources sought are normal throughout the year. When it gets towards the end of the year, they don't have time to send it out, monitor it, worry about a ton of responses. And so you want to get in there and respond to these. So the last place they might look, and I just want to say this in case people think about it, are web searches, right? No contracting officer or market researcher really has time for it. Program managers, when they're looking for companies, or not even companies, but they're just trying to learn about artificial intelligence or whatever, they might do that through the year. But when you get to the end of the year spending period, or fourth quarter, and you don't have a lot of time as a KO and a market researcher, the web searches become far less efficient and very time consuming, right? I have to go into your website and look at it. And so that's the least used tool in the end of the year spending. So anyways, that's how they do market research. Let's talk about which portals you need to be in to get found. By the way, tell me in the chat while I drink water, do you think your DSBS profile is unknown, okay, or great? I'd love to see it. And if I see you put it in, I might grab like 5 or 10 of you and go take a quick look and give you real feedback about what the buyer is seeing. By the way, if this is your first time, we move at a fire hose pace. Watch me on replay and slow me down to half speed. All right, let's talk about which portals you must be in so that you can be found by the buyers. And you're going to see a lot of commonality to what I just said. First one is this dynamic small business search, right? And this one's really important for you to keep in mind. If you haven't been in there, go look at it. It's just dsbs.sba.gov. Somebody put it in the chat for me. You know what the URL is. Put it in there for the other people. But here's a quick story of how important it is. I had a company that I used to, it was SharePoint. So one of my last companies focused on Microsoft SharePoint products. And there was a third-party tool called Nintex that we used to be able to make a lot of money off of just by selling the licenses. And so, you know, we would be a Nintex partner and we would sell that to the government. When they were doing market research, they'd look for firms like us that could respond and talk to them about Nintex and give them a quote. It really was that simple. I didn't have to write these complicated proposals because they kind of already knew they wanted the product. I went into the dynamic small business search tool the other day. There's 300,000 small businesses. 4 companies say the word Nintex. But if I looked at the word SharePoint, there's 4,000 companies that say they do SharePoint. But because they're not really using DSBS in a way to get found by the buyer, they don't think about how the buyer might search. And so I encourage you to go into DSBS and make sure that you put in your top 10, 20, 30 keywords, right? I'm working with a new customer right now in our workshop, and I said, here's your task. You need to give me 50 keywords that you want to be found for. So if somebody is searching for Nintex, if somebody is searching for Otis elevators, make sure those words are in your small business profile in the dynamic small business search so that you can be found when a market researcher is looking for you. The second one is agency supplier portals. I already mentioned this, but when you go into an agency supplier portal, it's got that same kind of activity. So let me just go over here really quick. GovCon Chamber. So if I come in here really quick, these 3 directories right here on the right-hand side is the Federal Directory of Vendor and Supplier Portals. There's like 100 supplier portals in here, many federal agencies and many small business, large primes, so small business liaison officers, but large primes in there. Get in there and get yourself registered in those supplier portals. The next one you want to be in, right? I said agency supplier portals, large prime supplier portals, but the next place is kind of unusual, right? So market research, it's normal to go to those first 3 that I just said, because I already talked about it. But you also want to be in the SBA district office. Make sure your SBA district office knows who you are. Make sure you have a relationship with them, right? You don't need to pester them. You need to build a strategic relationship with them. Listen to them, get their advice, take their advice and do it, and go back and say, I did it. What do you think? When you do that, you sink into their memory. And when a customer comes and asks, a government agency comes and asks the SBA, hey, do you know anybody? They might refer you. And these PCRs or procurement center representatives, they're another great representative at the SBA offices who work hand in hand with agencies, right? It's not really a portal, but they do keep their own list of small businesses. You want to be in there so they remember who you are. I just wanted to tell you this quick story. I heard it's like 2 days ago, maybe it was yesterday actually. But somebody I was talking to who's in our community was saying this exact story about how a customer came to the small business, the SBA district office and said, do you know anybody? And that office referred them right to this person because she did what the agency was looking for. So right then and there is this introduction. Does it happen every time? No, but if it happens and it's a contract, that's a big deal. I can't remember if I put this on my board on the slides, but one of the things I wanted to say is just that one tip, right? That one tip about SBA district office. If I'm wrong, you've spent a few minutes making an introduction. If I'm right, you could potentially win millions, right? Balance that out when you look at any of these recommendations I'm making. If I'm wrong, you've spent a few minutes filling out a portal. But if I'm right, you get found and you potentially are making millions. To me, that is a no-brainer. Okay, so another place similar to the SBA office are the Apex accelerators. Used to be called PTAX, still are called PTAX in many places. But make sure you have a relationship with your local PTAC counselor, and make sure that counselor is letting the rest of the PTAC know who you are. Those offices aren't that big for you to become visible. Really, you can show up to their events once a month, and that's enough to keep traction in there. But you want them to know who you are. So if an agency comes and says, hey, PTAC, do you know anybody? We sure do. LinkedIn is this next place. So I'm going down in the order, by the way. I don't mean bounce around. Make sure the small business, directory, the DSBS, is filled out before you ever start moving down. Okay, so and then last was LinkedIn. Make sure you're in LinkedIn, because if you're in LinkedIn and you've got your tags in there, same thing with your website. If you're in your LinkedIn and your website, make sure it has your tags. So if somebody's searching for HubZone that does something, ADA that does something, they can find you. But make sure it's really easy to find your UEI and your cage code. So when they go over to DSBS, when they go to FPDS or CPERS or wherever they want to go, they've got your numbers so they can learn about you. And make sure they're correct. Yesterday alone, I sent 2 different messages to people who are in our community telling them that your UEI is wrong. Like, one person in their footer, the UEI was wrong, and they're taking care of it, right? They're appreciative that I told them. But if you make a market researcher grab a wrong UI and go in, they're not going to do what I did, which is come back and try to figure it out. They're like, I'm out of here. Let me move to the next one. Shortlisting is about just finding enough of the right companies. Okay, just in time, I'm going to move to this last one. I really want to talk about creating an RFI responding machine. The idea behind this is I want you to respond to as many RFIs as you can. That really is the best way to get in front of the government's eyes, right? When you respond to an RFI, you're telling them that I'm interested. You're demonstrating capability and interest through your RFI. So you want to be dropping that RFI in. I think I might say it in here, but you have got to make sure when you're responding to RFIs, they're in your core competency. So first, know your core competency, have a niche, a focused offering, right? And then you're going to be responding to these. Another reason RFIs are great is they're free marketing. Imagine all the marketing you do. You pay a lot of money, tens of thousands of dollars to marketers to do social activity, to do your website. You might do, a radio or TV ads, whatever it is. Think about all these ads or marketing things you can do. Nothing is as free and as great as an RFI response, because when it goes into the government, the KO sees it, right? They review it. They become aware of your company. The small business specialist sees it. Your company and your core competencies sink into the brain. The program office, who might have been hard for you to reach, is now reading your document. You're speaking right to the program office. Hey, Jane, this is what we do. This is how we can help you. Even if they don't choose you, they have now just basically read a white paper that you wrote for them. That's what an RFI response is a sales tool, a marketing tool, a white paper, if you will, that is saying, here is the best of us and here's why we would be great for you, right? And so this is free direct marketing that you couldn't get anywhere else. Okay, so let me talk about what that looks like when I talk about an RFI responding machine. The idea of a process or a system, putting that in place, I'm just saying it at a very high level, right? We got a quick training here, but these are the things to really pay attention to if you want to have a process and system in place that allows you to respond to as many RFIs as you can. The first thing is, again, know what your slam dunk opportunity is. A slam dunk opportunity is one we absolutely can win. I'm working with a customer right now who's responding to a SharePoint opportunity. This SharePoint opportunity, they can absolutely win. It's in the RFI stage. So they're writing the RFI. If you were here for yesterday's training, you might have seen that I had it all written in the background because I'm helping them on some of it. And so it's a slam dunk opportunity because it fits totally in their core competency and they have past performance related to it. So the second part of the process is when you know what your slam dunk opportunity is and you have RFIs coming in, you need to triage these RFIs in 5 minutes or less. And triage basically means they go to the garbage can or you keep them and respond to them. And so you should be able to look at the RFI and triage it on a couple of basic things. Is it our slam dunk? Yes. Is there any barrier for us going in? I don't care if something's wired, by the way. RFI responses, don't sit there and talk yourself out of responding because it's wired. If it's going to another contract vehicle, you might consider not responding to it. But if it's your core competency and if it's your target agency, respond to the RFI. I'm talking about look in there. If I think it's SharePoint, but I get in there and it's really SharePoint was just one word, but it's actually something else, then I bail on it. Triage is about saying no as fast as you can. But when you find those ones that you can write to, move on to step 3, which I should have numbered here. But step 3 is quickly create an outline draft. And what I mean by that is you should be able to send that in and the government goes, well, that's great. That's a great response, except for it lacks any substance, right? And that's what I mean. Don't have a half-baked draft outline. Have it ready for sending back so anybody on your team can create that. And then your technical SME, whoever's got the can write the technical response, then they fill it in after they do this storyboarding exercise, right? You go up to me, I go up to a whiteboard. You can do it any way you want, but I go up to a whiteboard and I'm just looking at the PWS and going, how can I respond to this in the strongest way, in a way that allows me to deliver a slam dunk response to an opportunity that I think is slam dunk for us. And when you do that, write a full draft, review it, edit it, and send it. I know this seems pretty simple, but the whole point is it should be that simple. If you're not able to take a slam dunk opportunity and move it through pretty fast through a process to get a response out in a couple of days to an RFI at most, then maybe that response is not for you, right? That's the part of triaging. Is this truly a slam dunk? So know what your slam dunk is, and it'll make the next 4 steps easier. The last thing I have here, just as it relates to creating an RFI responding machine, is make sure you have reusable content. You should not have to write about our company over and over again. You should have a 1-page response that can be scaled down to a 1-paragraph response, right? You should have a staffing approach already written, right? If you don't have it written yet, don't worry. You're going to write it in a minute. And the first time you write it, refine it so it's reusable. But when you start having this reusable stuff for the template layout that I talked about, the outline, your company information, like staffing approach, et cetera, and then technical approaches, right? If I'm looking at SharePoint, like I described a minute ago, there is a way that I respond to the application development. I look at it and I rank it on complexity, and then I rank it on the impact to the business. Well, when I have that technical approach and I write that, that's a response I can put anywhere. And I'll have it at different sizes, but it doesn't take you long if you aim for your slam dunk opportunities to have reusable material. So make sure you're building that reusable material. All right, so I know we're moving fast, and here's what I want you to remember from today's training. End of the year wins for 8A small businesses that are focused, have a focused offer, and have experience, have been paid for this work before. That's a real opportunity. Those end of the year wins are real. Right? It's not real for you if you just get into the government contracting, but for those of you who've got the experience in the niche down offering, it's a real opportunity for you. It's important though that you put your pole in the water, your hook in the water, right? You need to be where the buyers are looking in order to get found. And the last thing that I want you to remember is that RFI responses, sources sought responses, responding to these and letting them know that you're interested and competent is the fastest way to build your reputation within an agency and a customer that you don't have any traction with. And it's a great way to get them to start reaching out to you because they become aware of you. Hey, I just want to say thank you to the sustaining members who helped make this possible. If you find value in the training, become a sustaining member today. And if your business is doing 2 million plus, right, you want to go to the next level. If you're ready to invest in going to the next level, love to talk to you about an end of the year activity that we're doing. We have our BD Accelerator workshop, but for the end of the year, I want to focus it on really 8A firms, right? Not to discount everybody else, but 8As have a really good shot towards the end of the year. And so I'm looking for 5 companies. If you're interested, just reach out to me on DMs. For everybody else, remember, government contracting, it's not a secret. It's just a process. I'll see you in the next training.